So, Isaac Mizrahi, I saw an interview that you did before you started performing at the Carlyle, and you said that the eighth grader version of you would have been very surprised that you went into fashion and would have assumed that you would have gone into music. What would that eighth grader think of you performing at venues like the Cafe Carlyle or somewhere in Beverly Hills or around the world?
I think that the eighth grader would have been way less surprised, but also extremely, extremely proud and happy, you know. Um, and what I love is that I I've lived this incredible life, which kind of like informs my stage presence, you know. I mean, even when I'm acting, I just got through on Broadway as Amos Hart, in Chicago. And even that is so like when I'm actually playing a character, that is really informed by the past sort of like 35 years of my life, pursuing something so fervently, and doing a lot. I do a lot, and at the same time that I was making these clothes, I was still performing with my band and working with Ben Walzer and kind of doing these small gigs. And now it's kind of taking center stage in my life. And I feel like it's right because, by the way, this is Neil. Say hello to Neil. Neil is just we work together, and
Hi,
I just
Craig.
have him on
Good to see
interview.
you.
Okay. But anyway, the point is that I don't I there was a time when I thought I had kind of chosen the wrong path. I really mean it. I thought, like, how did I do that? Why did I do that fashion thing when it makes me so happy to be on stage and to be performing? I mean, fashion makes me happy, but in a completely different way, It's sort of the type A kind of like damage control side of me, this kind of bossy, gay kind of like, I like being this person who runs after people and reties their bows better, um so that was that's sort of what that's about. And I still do it. And I do have, I mean, let's face it, I do have a really big business, a big fashion business, and I'm very pleased about that. It's some money for one thing, right? I often say, like, if I didn't do that, I don't know if I'm not really this kind of star. I'm not this, like, I'm not John Hamm, let's put it that way. I'm not like a matinee idol. I'm more like a character player, And
Well,
so
you probably also wear underwear.
well, there you go. Yes, I do sometimes. Yes, exactly.
I have to say, as you're talking, Isaac, the idea of you playing Amos Hart is rather ironic to me. A man who isn't visible, who isn't being seen. That seems like it is exactly the polar opposite of you.
I know. And of course it's called acting or performing, right? And there is a part of that I can so relate to, I don't care who you are, I don't care how flamboyant you are or how sort of like beautiful you are. There is a side of you that always feels not seen, or what there was a side of you that where you felt unseen, and that is what I tapped into. And honestly, like, I made every single choice as an actor to play the part of someone invisible, from like the clothes that I wore. I chose my own wardrobe. I mean, I worked with William Ivy Long, but I chose things, right? And also I had this like really kind of emotional kind of meeting with the music director, a guy called Rob Bowman. And I said to him, I was like, darling, this person gets one moment on that stage when he sings, and not even, it's not the whole song, it's one moment at the end of the song when you will notice this character. The rest of the time he keeps looking around like, what is this, like, do you not notice me, and I purposely did it that way. So
Now, I was looking up some of the things that you've said before in interviews, and things that you're quoted as saying. And one of them was, I don't like people to feel completely described by the clothes they wear of mine. I want them to feel that they're describing themselves. And I'm wondering, by extension, what can we learn about you from the songs you choose to perform and the way you choose to perform them?
Well, that's a very intelligent question. I mean it, because I honestly, this is going to sound like a trite kind of an answer to such a smart question. I feel like the songs choose me, the way clothes choose you, or the way like a pastry chooses you when you walk into a bakery. The thing just calls out and you look at it and you go, I must eat that, and it's the same way. It's like, there are certain things that I feel really comfortable wearing because I feel like they fit well, and there are certain songs that are just begging to be done by me, and and it's really it's really a very, very mysterious and emotional process by which you pick songs. And then at the end of the day, when you've rehearsed it and put it together and it's in the show and it makes a lot of sense with the patter that comes before something, you go, of course, really? Like it took you, really? You didn't see that coming? Like, how did you not know? And, by the way, it's so funny because, I think like maybe we worked on the last project with Burt Bacharach before he died, Mark Morris and I don't know if you know this, but we were actually in LA with Burt in October doing that show that Mark did, right? At the Broad.
Right. I actually spoke to Mark about that show.
The premiere of the show. And Burt was involved. He like came to a few of the rehearsals and gave notes. And I saw him. I haven't seen him for a very, very long time. We got a chance to visit. But I don't know why I brought that up. Why did I bring that up? But because what was the question again? I'm sorry.
About what we can learn about you by the songs that you choose.
Right. I mean, and of course, having been through that entire thing with Burt and Mark for the past 2 years, right? I have been, well, I always do a little bit of Burt in my shows, but I was thinking about what to do. And I was thinking about Alfie, and we tried it a few times, but now like it's become a very imperative part of my next set. Like I have to have Alfie in that set, because I literally, Burt, I loved him so much when I was growing up. My father, I don't know if this is interesting to you, I wrote him a note. We saw him perform anytime he was on the East Coast. We saw him as a family. The family just loved him. And I wrote a note to him, and my father took it up to the stage and handed it to him. Westbury Music Fair. It was like theater in the round. It was very casual. My father felt completely justified. He took this because I was obsessed with him, And so you're asking about how I choose songs, right? You can't ignore, this incredible kind of yearning to be Dionne Warwick in my younger self, I yearned to be Dusty Springfield. And so this is me when I'm going to be doing, I forgot what it was, the few numbers I've ever done of Burt's. I did Don't Make Me Over. I've done Always Something There to, I become Dusty Springfield, or I become Dionne Warwick when I do those numbers. In my brain, I'm like this little version of, I swear, Liza or something. Or Anthony Newley, I do the Joker. I used to do the Joker. It was my opening number, and I would become Anthony Newley in my brain. Like this is what I do,
Which isn't a radical departure from you as a boy impersonating Barbra Streisand, is it?
No, not at all. And like sometimes I catch myself and I go, maybe you don't want to sing this song exactly as though you're, Shirley Bassey. Give it a minute, like pull back. What about you are you bringing to this number, Yeah.
Of course. When you brought up the idea of like a pastry calls out to you in a bakery or something like that. At a bakery, you have the ability to just say, you know what, that's what I'm going to have today. As a performer, what freedom do you give yourself and what trust do you give your musicians to just say, you know what, I don't feel like that today. Right now in this performance, I'm going to do something else.
Well, I have to say, we are very good at that. We are changing sets until the last second. And I don't know if you saw Patti LuPone's show. Did you see it?
Of course.
Right. The most recent one where she pulls songs out of a hat.
Yes, I did. It was live streamed, so I was able to see it.
Right. So, it's like that is the ultimate kind of fabulous idea about changing stuff up. Of course, that's random, It's like Merce Cunningham or something, like an event, right? It's a random event. You just pull a thing out of a hat. And it had structure. She had an opening number and a middle number and a closing number. It was great. but you know, in my case, we do feel out what works, right? And you know, I've been honestly, like, even at the Carlyle, I change the setup from night to night here and there. You know, I mean, you get something that works, and finally you just kind of stick with it and you sit in it, and it becomes better and bigger and better. But I'm definitely going to change the setup for LA. Definitely, I know that already. You
Well, you're
know,
launching a new show at the Carlyle this week, The
that's
Marvelous
right.
Mr. Mizrahi. And the
Mhm.
show in Los Angeles is billed as an evening with Isaac Mizrahi.
Oh,
Is
is
there a
it?
yeah, is there a fundamental difference between the two shows?
No, no, there really isn't. I mean, it'll probably be a lot of what I'm going to perform at the Carlisle, except I know for a fact that, like, there are certain numbers I'm going to take out and change up, you know? Um, because there are certain songs that they've never seen me do live there that are so delicious, you know, so good that I can't not do them. And I know there are certain songs that I'm doing for the Carlisle because it has to be all new music, you know. You know, it has to be a completely new show. But in LA, my show is all new, like from day one, you know, because I've never played there before. So
Right. There's one thing I love about the press release that came out for the show at the Wallis, because it says you'll be performing soon to be classic songs. And I'm wondering how you how you define what a soon to be classic song is.
you know, like, to me, Billie Eilish is a genius, right? So if she writes something, it is soon to be classic. You know, I mean that. I'm not sure if that's her pronoun, if she is her pronoun. If they write something, it's going to be great, you know. Um, what else is soon to be classic? Well, you'll see. I don't want to spoil stuff.
Well, no, but I just wanted to get a definition of what soon to be classic is.
How's that? How's that? How's that?
Yeah,
And there are also, like, some songs that may in past have been considered, like, you know, silly fluff, which I absolutely think are not silly fluff, and I absolutely adore, like my opening number, which at the Annenberg will probably be I'll plant my own tree, you know, from Valley of the Dolls, right? And it's this amazing arrangement that we killed ourselves over, you know. And I feel like maybe that's not considered a classic, but soon to be considered classic after you hear my cover of it.
yes, because there is more than just the theme from the Valley of the Dolls.
Right. There's I'll plant my own tree. And darling, you might hate it. So maybe it won't be classic. That's why I say, you know, perhaps soon to be classic, some of the soon to be classic songs. And by the way, you know, I'll tell you what, like Mark, speaking of a dear long friendship, right? Like, he he has, after the last show at the he was, for days he was calling me, telling me how much he adored my set, and you had this great idea, and what a great thing, and you, that's amazing, that arrangement, and blah blah. It was really, because, you know, I always consider Mark the great musician. I think he's the greatest musician I know, really. He knows more about music than almost any musical scholar anyway. But so that was a really great bonus for me, that Mark actually for days was aggressively telling me how much he loved it, you know. Yeah.
He's not an easy critic either, is he?
No, darling, oh my God, wow. You know, so that was, but that was like a real thrill for me, you know.
Yeah, I do have to say that when I spoke to him for the Backrack show, I was very pleased to see how much he took the piss out of himself in the process.
Yes, right, exactly. And the piss out of everything and everybody around
Well,
him.
yes, of course. I expected that. It was, you know, the fact that he could take the piss out of himself that was so satisfying.
We're similar in that way, you know.
Right.
Stick around, darling, stick around. But
Right. Your Instagram account has a couple photographs of encounters you had with Stephen Sondheim, whose music is apparently going to be part of your show. What do you remember most about your encounters with Steve?
um his his a kind of um resonance in our backgrounds. You know, he's a native New Yorker, and so am I, you know. And so there's this kind of similarity in the way we see the world. There's a similarity in um our senses of humor. I mean, he's wicked sense of humor, you know, Steve. And there's, I look up to him. I feel like you know, of course, everybody looks up to him. I went to the revival of Merrily, and I just cried for the entire, you know, 2.5 hours. It was just sobbing through the whole thing. because there's a way that he has of looking at the world that I always aspired to. There has never been a greater teacher to me in terms of not necessarily how I look at musical theater, but of course how I look at musical theater. But that's not even, it's just the way I look at life. I groomed myself to be like a sort of a living, breathing Stephen Sondheim character, you know? I don't know if you read any part of my memoir, but I went to performing arts high school. And part of the thing I loved about the adults at that school was that they were literally like Sondheim characters, you know? They were all these erudite kind of sophisticates who had like, who drank a little too much probably, you know, and were very, very, very acerbic and critical, you know. And I've groomed myself. I can't drink. I can't drink as much as all of that because I'm allergic to it or something. I'm not like a big drinker, but that's the only thing about me that is not like typically Sondheimian, you know, and not just in terms of the music that I do or my love of musical theater or something. As an adult person, you know. Does that answer the question?
It does, absolutely. But I also want to ask you, you don't just have the perspective as a singer with Stephen Sondheim's music. You have the perspective of having directed A Little Night Music in 2010. That's right. And I'm wondering how the director who had that experience influences the singer who then performs the songs.
Well, here's the thing, you know, I also did a show off Broadway where I re-lyricized one of Steve's numbers from Anyone Can Whistle, the opening number, you know, everyone hates me, you know that, right? And we were very close friends at the time, and it was daunting. It was daunting, you know. First of all, just to send him the lyrics, hey, Steve, I want to send you these before you hear it on the street, you know, and he liked it. He actually wrote me back, this is a really good job. Congratulations, you know, it was a thrill. And then he came to see the show and he really liked it, you know, and he gave me a few pointers and a few notes. And so, you know, and he did not come to St. Louis to see the show. He had this thing in his bonnet about the St. Louis Opera Company. I don't know if you know this, he wanted to do, they commissioned him. They offered a commission and he was going to do Into the Woods. And they were like, maybe not something like that. What else you got? And he was like, oh, really? Oh, really? You know, so he didn't really have the best. So he didn't come to St. Louis to see and it's one of the things I wish I had forced, you know, I wish I had forced him to come because it was, I thought, such an incredibly beautiful production. And, you know, so many of my friends, again, like tough customers, adored it.
You know, when you've worked intimately with someone's work as a director, and frankly, whether it's Sondheim's work or anybody else's, does that allow you a different perspective than you might have when you approach it as a singer?
Yes, because also knowing Steve and really knowing this person, I mean, for a very long time, I knew for a fact that he didn't really regard, you know, singery voices to be the greatest things. He loved a good singer, let's face it. He loved Barbara Cook. He loved people who could really sing and produce a sound, but he also adored more, I think. I think he valued more people who could tell stories and you know, like Beth Howland. I mean, he adored Beth Howland, right? He adored Barbara Barry, right? Like these are not necessarily people you would cast for their singing voices. And yet I think he thought, I know that he thought Being Alive, the best version of all the great singers who sang that song, all the people who really could produce these unbelievable sounds, he liked Dean Jones the best because it was great. You know, I mean, because he really tried and it was like that every person's sound that he liked the best, you know, so that really, and he loved Stritch. He loved the way Stritch could sing because, and, you know, once I did an interview with her, right, on my show, I was supposed to have her on my show. And they said, if you want to do a pre-interview with her, the only time she can do it is 3 o'clock in the morning because she's insane. She's like this big insomniac. So I called her at 3 o'clock in the morning because I am too, right? And she ended up not being on the show because she thought she got the dates wrong, okay, which is hysterical. So basically, but she said, oh, I'm such a great raconteuse, you know, blah, blah. And I thought, no, darling, I said to her, darling, you are a great musician, you know, just because you're not, I mean, who can really sing? Let's think of somebody like, just because you're not
Well, let's use Streisand. We've already brought her up earlier.
well, you can
Streisand can
talk about
certainly
Streisand,
sing.
but I wouldn't even, I'm talking about somebody like, like Kristen
Chenoweth?
Chenoweth. Yeah. She is an amazing, she can produce almost an operatic sound, It's an incredible, incredible like instrument. And I know Sondheim adored the way she sang, but to me, as they are equals as musicians, Kristen Chenoweth and Elaine Stritch were the same to me. They were, you know what I mean? Like Chenoweth has a great sound, but so did Stritch. And she wasn't necessarily making this incredible head sound, right? You know what I mean, right?
I absolutely know. Well, Steve was very, very well known for having said that he prefers actors who can sing than singers who can act.
Singers who can act, absolutely. I know that. That's one thing I have going for me. Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I'm a lapsed piano performance major, so I have a background in music. I don't have a background in fashion, but I have to think that there are some overlaps between the two. You have your foot in both easily. What do you see as what fashion and music have in common?
Yeah, or music and performance. I mean, fashion and performance and music and performance and fashion, right? Because there's a kind of one thing, like, of course, clothing is a lot about styling, juxtaposing things next to each other that are extremely interesting that have not been done before, So I'm really good at like arranging the song in the way that I want it to be presented and then perceived, right? But more than that, darling, the invention of it, it's like, don't bore me. If you're going to do the song in exactly the same way or worse than the way the person who covered it did it, it's like, again, I go back to this Billie Eilish thing or something, or I go to, I do You're the Top. Every season I write these crazy, it's like Roger Angel, I write like kind of hilarious lyrics, right, to You're the Top. And like, that's my way, because, like, for instance, Patti LuPone did that in Anything Goes. When I was a kid, I went to see that, and it was like, don't touch that, because she just killed it. So don't go near it, But I go near it because I write these new lyrics. You know what I mean? So I give it my way of making it something a little, to me, better or something, or at least better from my perspective than that. You know what I mean?
Yes, and a gay man would have a better association with You're the Top than a heterosexual woman.
Well, that's my patter, of course, right? Because You're the Top. It's my favorite song ever written, basically just the title, right? But I mean, like, it's like so many times you see like movies remade or something, and they're just not as good. And you're like, well, why did you bother doing that? Why don't you take a shitty movie and remake it and do it better? You know what I mean? Or do something with the movie that's really interesting, So.
You're channeling John Huston when you said that, because he famously said, I don't know why they spend so much time remaking good movies when there's so many bad ones that could be made better.
I think do you mean John Waters or John Huston?
John Huston.
Okay. Well, also John Waters said that, the fabulous John Waters, who's my dad's neighbor. Yeah.
Of course. Now we just alluded to the fact that you have your riffs and your patter that you bring into your concerts. And I loved the whole idea that you said in one of the clips on your Instagram page, is that when you get older, you do not get better looking.
No, this is just the truth.
And then you also talked about how work on your face is like putting air freshener in a room with shit. It's still going to be shit with lavender.
That's exactly what it's like.
Right. So what is your relationship to getting older?
This is part of course, what I'm going to be talking about in this particular show. I have begun to, I'm not kidding, I've turned some kind of crazy corner my whole life, right? I look at pictures and go like, oh, and somehow, right, like, I'm reading Instagram and there's like, every 7 or 17 lovely, complimentary comments, there's one hateful thing that somebody says. And I've started to kind of like them. I started to like the haters things almost more than I like the likers, right? And so now it's this, I don't know how, this is like, it's like liking the haters. I love these pictures of myself where I look like a fat old Jew. You know what I mean? I'd honestly like it. I love it. I think like, I recommend it. As my mother said about like the fact that she's getting older and older and older, and she can't eat and she can't sleep and she can't speak and she can't remember anything. I recommend it. This is what she said. I recommend these pictures of me as a fat old queen,
It's also nice to take the hate away from the haters too, isn't it? By embracing that.
Yes. By going, darlings, I never meant for you to like me. I adore the controversy. Yes.
Now, one thing that I think you told Terry Gross on Fresh Air in 1998 that you hated when you were younger were bell bottoms, because you associated them as a young boy with drugs, and with rock and roll, the Rolling Stones and Janis Joplin and things like that. They're supposedly coming back. What's your relationship with bell bottoms in 2023?
Darling, if they're right, they might be right. I do them and make them better. And also, part of me, of course, I associated them with all those scary things. And, here I was like this young boy who loved Burt Bacharach, sort of the opposite of all that, and loved musical theater, which was sort of the opposite of all that was going on with the young revolution. But also looking at my sisters who were wearing bell bottoms, who were like thin and beautiful. And I was this meeskite, this little fat kid, and my mother would say, darling, you can't wear bell bottoms. They're not good. It's not your friend. It's not flattering. I can't wear the bell bottoms. That's why I hate bell bottoms. They're loaded. It's like platform shoes, very loaded. My mother would say, darling, heavy people cannot wear platform shoes. That's what she would say. She would call me heavy. You're a heavy person. You can't wear platform shoes. And she was doing me a favor. Like, to her, she was, thank you, Sarah Mizrahi, right? So I have a very loaded thing about bell bottoms and platform shoes.
Right. Well, I want to finish.
Sorry, we just got to jump in about a couple minutes. So
okay. No, that's fine. I'm very cognizant of the clock here.
Thank you. It's also really refreshing to be doing such an interesting and intelligent thing. But go on.
Thank you. Your career is not isolated to one lane, which I think is fabulous. And the music side of you is really blossoming now. You and I are the same age, actually. And I'm wondering, seeing that you've directed Peter and the Wolf, that you're singing around the world, that you've directed opera, that you've designed clothes for opera, are you spending the next chapter of your life trying to prove F. Scott Fitzgerald wrong, that there are truly second and third acts in American life?
Yes. Yes. The answer is very simple. And, one of the things that Steve used to say to me all the time, he was like, oh, darling, you're a polymath. And I thought he was like, oh, you're such a polymath, right? Like, that means you suck at everything, whereas he is this great master. By the way, Stephen Sondheim and Mark Morris, right? My friends, right? Go figure that out. They do one unbelievably exquisite thing, that's all they do, right? Steve just wrote those words and wrote that incredible music and made those shows. Mark just makes those masterful poetic dances. That's all he does. And here I am, doing cooking videos, and this is who I can't not be that person. So now I'm kind of like thinking of those words of Steve going, oh, you're such a polymath. And I think he really meant it as a compliment. Now, after he's dead, I'm going, I think maybe he meant it as a compliment, not just as this kind of like, oh, you're a polymath,
Well,
have you met my mother? Have you met my mother? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Well, It must be nice to have that gift from Steve now that he's no longer here.
It is. It really, really is. At least in my fantasy, by the way.
What little time I spent with him, I think he would agree with you.